Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our first of a mini series around having little fireside chats, talking. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Joining, talking about the impacts of privacy and compliance on your business. We're finding that, as based on our conversations throughout the field, literally in some cases with hundreds of customers, we're understanding that a lot of folks are starting to look at the privacy area as obviously an area they need to start working on with the new privacy laws and these sort of things coming into place, but also an interesting opportunity to do leverage some of the existing work that's being done primarily in the security sector into the privacy realm. We started this conversation, a few months ago, basically, with online business systems and our partner, Innate Identity, going through what some customers will require as part of their journey through the privacy life cycle, essentially, and understanding how and when they'll need help, how and when they'll need expertise, and if there's tooling that is required. If you've ever done a security assessment, if you've compared your capabilities and functionalities on the inside of your enterprise with a NIST framework or an ISO framework or against COVID, you understand that a lot of folks have started to opt for a, kind of a security services quick start. This is going through assessment of your capabilities. Generally it's pretty detailed. It's survey-based primary. There is maybe somewhat of a light audit feel to it. Nothing too painful usually, but it is a good way to get a quick sense of where you stand within the infrastructure and what your aspirational security policy might be and where your gaps are. I've done this over the years in different contexts and in different lives, but at the end of the day, the security assessment is a great way to really understand where you're sitting, but also it feeds into the rest of your business process. A big one that we've used the security assessments for in the past have been to say, here's what the funding requirements are for next year as we're doing budget work, right? Another great way that the assessments drive out intelligence for the business is understanding where your resources are. Do you have enough security engineers? Do you need to do security operations training or even basic security training as well? So the one thing we cooked up here for you today was to go through primarily what an assessment looks like in general, and then also what it would look like in a privacy context. Same idea, we're going through a methodology. We're using aspirational or high-level goals to drive requirements against what you have on the inside, and then documenting those gaps. And the thing with the gaps is, we can do red, green, yellow, and understand which one's serious or not, and do a risk assessment against them. But I think what's important to say is, out of the hundreds of assessments I've done, and Rick has done as well, I'm sure, we've never had one perfect or had one that was done, right? There's always going to be something that needs to be improved upon or built upon. And that's not a play against, let's do more work or, there's shame on you, you're missing things. It's really about the fact that, the standards change and move over time. The organization's capabilities change as well. And, certainly there's always going to be areas that could be improved, need to be improved, or have changed to the point where there's, an explicit focus required. So thank you very much for joining our session today. The agenda essentially is the introduction I just did, introducing our two panelists as well who are on the call, and going through specifically what this looks like from an assessment perspective. And, I want to thank Rick and Jay specifically for taking the time today and, in the past few weeks getting this together. This is, we've done this a few times as Data 443 with Innate specifically. It's our first session with online business systems. Online has been a very capable and widespread systems integrator, primarily in Western North America. I think maybe, Rick, that'd probably be the best way to describe you folks. And, back in my hometown is where they started, which is great. And the funniest thing today is all three panelists are actually in Canada today for the session. So in different cities, but it's certainly good to be back home for the session and run through what this looks like. The idea is Rick is going to go through an assessment template and some of the methodology work that his team does. Jay's going to go through how we enable some of the assessment capabilities that Rick might need to do. When or where you would run some of his tooling to get some data. And then I'm going to follow up with the same idea, saying, hey, from an assessment perspective, we might get an output that looks like this, and you might use Classy Docs as part of the solution to document that information. The idea here is, in general, for you to understand what assessment looks like, the takeaway for you is, here are some of the artifacts, here's a little bit of the methodology about the steps that go into an assessment, and understand that, in some cases, a point run of innate identity or Classy Docs supports the methodology collection and backs up some of the data that's collected there. Okay. Mr. Holod, you are up, sir. Are you ready? I have now unmuted you. How's that sound? Rick, you there? Okay. Seems he has dropped. Let's see what else we can start with. Maybe what I'll do is I'll go through his first slide as he figures out his technology stuff. What I want to do when he comes back is to go through some of the online business systems or online as our new branding from that perspective and really understand some of the business side. I think it's important. They're a small and tight shop with really good methodology actors, basically, is what I'm going to call them, architects and these sort of things who have a lot of background in this space. What's interesting in this space is you're seeing, some of the good actions out of PCI, for example, audits and remediation activities fitting perfectly into exactly what you need to do for a PII or a privacy-based initiative. It is kind of the same activities. You're looking for zone of delineation, you're understanding who's got access to what, you're having good controls internally to manage these things. And primarily also, you're having a good, I hate to say documentation stack, because I don't think anyone really loves doing documentation, but certainly having capabilities documented around what it looks like from an infrastructure perspective and, where we're storing PCI information, how we're managing access to it, and these sort of things. So online's definitely done a lot of work in that space, and, the privacy initiatives are the next step for them from a capability perspective. What we've seen with online specifically, and Rick, jump in when you're back online, is we're seeing that the assessment perspective is actually fairly straightforward. And it's not going to be anything that you're going to be, surprised with or, shocked. At the end of the day, there are very simplistic steps that go into the process, right? We're going to do a discovery phase, which is essentially walking through and understanding what you do have, assessing those capabilities against the methodology. And some of those things might be, tailored to what you need. In this example, let's say you are a US company in the Midwest with no European operations at all, but you might have footprint in California. That footprint in California is now going to extend the California privacy law, the breach notification law, into your response templates and activities. This is really important for you to start planning for, of course, because the time to not do it is when you have an incident. But at the end of the day, those legislations, and it could be just HIPAA as well, it could be something else, give you requirements to map your capabilities against. And that's the big part here, right? As part of the assessment, we're going to say, okay, you're manufacturing, and here's the three regulations that apply to you. PCI does not. but PII does because you have employees, of course, and you have retirees and all these other sort of folks that are in part of the mix. And then we're going to do the assessment based on those requirements. And the quick start capability is really more about combining the efforts of the assessment and then also collecting the information that might need to be mechanically or manually collected. Pardon me. So we've seen some assessments go where you might just run a data governance tool in an identity governance tool, something to give you some reporting about, when the last time a recertification was done. Have we ever done, AD group cleanup, for example? Has the permissions on this file share ever been reviewed by someone who's in leadership? Those kinds of quick points in time scans, report, documentation capabilities are primarily where third parties come in, right? And this is like NH or Classy Docs or other products that might support that. Online also has, of course, their own little toolkit they bring with them that will do some of the assessment against AD and some of that group magic as well, be part of the assessment. The whole idea, though, is to bring up a roadmap based on the assessment and having a capability list about what can and cannot be done. Okay, so the roadmap is going to be something also tailored to what your capabilities are. And this is really important to document because, like I said, any assessment I've ever been involved with, big or small, there's always going to be something, and it's not useful if everything is flaming red and there's no priority about the assessment results. We need to know that we might be deficient significantly in 3 areas and somewhat deficient in 30, but those 3 areas are significantly 2. Have a direct material effect on the business, and that's what we're going to focus on for the next quarter, the next year, right? Like I said, these things start driving budget, resourcing, services folks, and really a lot of the IT organizations specifically around what those goals are. Sometimes those goals are not, dropping in a SIM to do instant correlation. It could be, making sure that a staff security, education training system is in place. It could even be as simple as making sure the policies are up to date or reviewed continuously. So some of these things are soft type of deliverables from the roadmap and implementation perspective, and others will be more physical and running through a system of assessment. The idea, though, is this is custom tailored to you. This is something that is done fairly quickly and has the ability to, drive value very quickly through the organization. The other thing I like about this model primarily is as you're doing discovery and assessment, you're already starting to get some value from the assessment by saying, our security permissions on SharePoint sites is really poorly done. A lot of risk. We know we don't have to go further. It's flaming red. It needs to be fixed. You can kick off activities of that while the rest of the assessment is happening. And it's important to understand it's somewhat of an agile methodology, right? Okay, so we went through some of this already, but I think what's important for everyone to understand is, times and costs. And what's important here is, again, this is somewhat agile, very quick and easy to get into. You have value coming out, essentially at the assessment part, and even some of the discovery phase documents information that, you may have never seen before. I've certainly seen, someone say, wow, where'd that firewall come from? Or why is that, thing 4 years out of date with no patches? So some of the discovery and the assessment stuff I think is very exciting or scary. And then you start getting into the quick wins. And again, these are very simple things like, kicking off that program to do upgrades or whatever you might have already thought you want to do. Now you have data to support either the justification of the effort or the budget, right? And then you go into roadmap and implementation plans. Some of that might be bigger, right? But what we're finding is that this is a great system to, looks like I lost Zoom for a second, sorry. It's a great approach to say that we have capability. All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. Okay. Very strange story, everyone. The one good thing about the capability analysis framework is that we have the ability to, really be flexible with this, and something that I think as you go through the process, you can remap and change according to your needs. Again, the idea is we are able to do this flexibility with online business systems and really have that capability to be done quickly. I think it's an important thing to call out here, right? These are quick assessments. These are quick reviews. And the outputs look pretty cool. I think what everyone likes pretty graphs and red, green, yellow, preferably less red than not. But what you're seeing is on an assessment, and you're seeing, in this case, against this framework, you're seeing that not only is it red, but it's also, flagged from a sensitivity score requirement. And I think it's really important to highlight when you're looking to do something in compliance or privacy. Things like GDPR are very, very big legislations. They are not simple. They require significant efforts across the board. I'll give you an example with GDPR specifically and breach response, right? You not only have a time limit to respond to breach, which Google last week blew, by the way, and so did Facebook. You have to respond. You also have to have all the surrounding information around the breach, and that also has to go to the ICO all at the same time, nicely packaged. So this is what happened in the Facebook breach. Of course, I haven't seen all of it, but from what I understand, watching from the outside, they were late on the notification. They didn't have every identity that was affected documented. They don't have source data and who consumed the data. And as far as I know, also, they did not communicate who had access to the data. So it's like a 1, 2, 3, 4 strike in response to GDPR. So when you look at that specifically, and GDPR is covering things like policy, end user training, data classification, governance, identity governance, removal, provisioning, all that sort of stuff. It's really rich. You're going to have some reds, and you're going to have some areas that, of course, have a higher risk perspective than others. So it's going to be okay. I think don't be afraid. I do see that this kind of a deliverable is something that, upper management can also understand as well. When I think of budgeting, when I was at the banks, I was always bucketizing my budget into, categories of functionality. So identity management, endpoint security, perimeter security, these sort of things. And I wanted a breakdown of each of those as well, because, we had a lot of teams, a lot of folks doing those specific activities, but the budget was rolled up to a higher level. So now you're able to say, listen, from a risk perspective, we're at 1.8 overall, not bad, but certainly we've got a couple of gaps, and we need to invest in data security and protective technology, for example. So it's a good visual to represent here. The other thing I'll say with an assessment like this is, when I've done them before as a consumer and a consultant, I'd always recommended to repeat them. Probably yearly would be enough. It does give you obviously justification for the spend and effort you're doing, maybe to remediate something, but also it shows you where you may be becoming more deficient in a standard, right? Maybe, your SIM requirements aren't keeping up to the new protocols, for example. So it's a good way to watch over time. And a good services firm like Online is going to be able to give you those gaps between the two report periods. And of course, the assessments get generally faster as you go through them, because a lot of the heavy lifting has been done. So it's a great program. Rick is happy to talk about it further, and hopefully he joins us for the Q&A at the end. What I do want to do now is look into my friend, Mr. Jay O'Donnell, and walk through his couple quick slides. He's committed to keeping it under 15 minutes, which I'm sure won't be a problem. And really, at this point, when you think of the methodology around an assessment and where things like the Access Hub and Classy Docs come into play, in this function, we're the supporting actor to the main assessment, right? Jay may take in some of your data, some of your historical information, exports or extracts from some identity repositories, and start running the machine learning, the AI, and some of the magic around the workflows and understanding and producing some of that information that go into the assessment, right? So I'm not going to steal all this thunder, but you can see that the Access Hub in this case is a great supporting actor for a point-in-time snapshot analysis and long-term, recommendations. Jay, you have the floor. Let's see what's going on here. I will unmute you, Jay. I say, okay, unmute. There you go. There you
okay,
go,
can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so good. We don't have technical difficulties on this end.
Great.
But anyway, thanks for having me, Jason. What I'm going to talk about today, and we'll follow this up with a very, very quick demo of the Access Hub. We're going to set up a certification campaign, set up a sample policy, just so the attendees can see the product in action. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time to do a deep dive, but if anybody would like to see more, we can absolutely schedule a demo to follow on. So the product that I'm going to introduce today is called the Access Hub Enterprise Edition. And essentially, the whole purpose of the product, it's an identity governance platform that runs on Microsoft Azure. So what are some of the kind of core features that the product has? So we've recently won a couple of awards for the product, and primarily because of its key capabilities, which are very, very similar to other products in the marketplace. But one of the unique, or a couple of the unique things in the product that are getting this interest is we heavily use AI in the product, which is quite a different departure than most of the products in the marketplace. Most of them are very, very manual. They suffer from what I call toolkititis, which means that out of the box, they do nothing for you. You have to customize significantly. And ultimately, what that translates to is they're not agile to meet the speed of business. And secondarily, very, very high cost. So we're heavily utilizing artificial intelligence in the product to eliminate a lot of these manual activities that you have to do with current products today in the marketplace. Very, very simple to connect to virtually anything out of the box, whether those systems are in the cloud or whether they're on premise. So it is fully enterprise-wide, and because it's so easy to connect to all of my systems, it allows us to establish the governance program across a much broader set of systems. Because the current products in the marketplace are so difficult to utilize and require such heavy customization, we find that less than 18% of corporate systems actually fall underneath the governance umbrella. And that's largely due to cost and speed. One of the other interesting features of the product is you don't have to utilize yet another access control product. So the Access Hub runs on Azure and as an app, just like Office 365. And as such, we leverage all of the Azure SSO, federation, identity protection, multi-factor authentication. You don't have to deploy yet another stack. And again, simple and easy to use and quick time to value. So Jason, you talked about the assessment and about getting quick wins. The Access Hub is really targeted towards those quick wins. You should be able to get up and running within days and be able to run a certification campaign, configure request management and provisioning and what have you, okay? Not months and months and months and months of planning, okay? So some of the key feature categories in the product, and we're going to show you just a small subset of this. The first one is access management. As I mentioned before, we're an app that runs on Azure just like Office 365 or other products. And as such, we leverage all of the capabilities of Microsoft Azure from an authentication perspective. And this simplifies the overall IT infrastructure because yet again, we don't have to have another IDP or identity platform that we have to implement. The product supports the full access request management and provisioning. This includes onboarding and offboarding, automated provisioning and deprovisioning of access, as well as manual provisioning and deprovisioning. So we have connectors into products like ServiceNow, Zendesk, amongst others, for manual fulfillment if the automation, if you choose not to automate the provisioning or deprovisioning. Identity analytics and reporting, again, very AI oriented to help you identify problems in advance. So to alert essentially you to identity governance related issues. Access certification and governance, so it has the ability for you to quickly establish policies, and those policies may be things like if the person has this Salesforce role, then they can't have this Active Directory group. Very, very simple, and Jeremy's we're gonna walk through a simple demo example of the setting up a policy. Very, very quick, very, very easy, no coding required. And then again, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
No, it's okay. And I guess the main point here is, again, the speed to market, the time to deployment, the ease of operation, the cloud deployment, all that feeds into that assessment that is, again, returning results immediately as it's being worked through with the online business systems team. So you're delivering, analytics and data, day zero, basically. And I think it's really important. Yeah, it's great stuff.
Right, absolutely. It's important to be agile, and competing products in the marketplace just take way too long to do simple things like A, get it operational, and B, to do things like upgrades and what have you, take months and months and months of planning. Okay, so we've taken a very agile approach to this. From an architectural perspective, the Access Hub lives in the cloud on Microsoft Azure. Very, very simple to configure, point and click to connect to all of my cloud applications. We also have an on-prem gateway, so if you want to do provisioning to any internal systems like Active Directory or Oracle or SAP or others, you can do that provisioning from the cloud to your on-prem environment. Okay, so now we'll quickly jump over into the demo. So Jeremy's going to log in here as super user. This demo here is live running on Microsoft Azure as we speak. All of this login process here is all Azure based. The Access Hub doesn't do any of that stuff. We leverage Azure for that purpose. So Jeremy's going to log in here, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to establish a simple policy. So Jeremy's going to establish an SOD policy. We're going to associate this policy with Office 365, for example. And the policies we have can be either optional or mandatory. The primary difference is if it's a mandatory policy, it does not allow the requester to move to the next step until that policy is satisfied. Okay, so an example of this is if I'm certifying access of a colleague and that colleague is in violation of the mandatory policy, it will not allow me to certify that access until I resolve that policy violation. If it's an optional policy, it will allow me to proceed, but I have to acknowledge that I'm in violation of that optional policy, and that overriding of that policy will be audited, okay? And we'll show you an example of that. So again, the creation of the policy is very, very simple, point and click. Doesn't, takes minutes to do. And you can evaluate it in real time. So Jeremy has established a policy saying if the employee job title is salesperson, then the Office 365 groups can't include IT system right access group. And down below, you can see that Chester Burke here, a person that we have in the Access Hub demo environment, is in violation of this policy. So we're just going to acknowledge that, and we're going to save this policy just to show you the behavior of what happens during a certification campaign. These policies also apply to any request management. So if I'm onboarding a new employee, I will see the violation of this policy during that onboarding process if I request things that are in violation of that policy. So Jeremy's going to go ahead and create a certification campaign. Now, the certification campaigns we have currently, you can run in 3 different modes. The first one is an organizational certification campaign. Now, what this means is my one-up manager is going to certify all of my access across all systems, okay? If you do the certification campaign by application, it means the application owner is going to certify the access for just that application alone. And the third one we have is by entitlement. And that's what we're going to do here for the demo purposes. And where this is typically used is, for example, if we're talking Active Directory groups, sometimes organizations have sensitive groups that may be managed by separate individuals. So what this allows you to do is to run a certification campaign by group and establish different owners for each one of those sensitive groups. It can also be used for specific roles on specific systems. So if you have an administrative role on SAP, for example, that you want somebody else to be the certifier of that administrative role, it's very, very quick and easy to do. Okay. So
yeah, and this is getting into a lot of the legislative requirements nowadays, whether it's PCI, HIPAA, SOX, or anything. Separations of duty, separations of recertification, and enforcement of those policies via controls are really what a lot of the assessment work is. And frankly, it's kind of easy to understand very quickly where some of this might be deficient. And what's important with the tool here for everyone to understand is that you don't necessarily have to do a deep integration into the enterprise and pull all this stuff out and open ports and all of that sort of stuff. We just went through a customer engagement earlier this week discussing some options, and one of them was to simply do exports from all the platforms and then run them through the NA product and produce those results. So a really simple way to at least get a sniff test of the organization capabilities and having that assessment done even faster, minimally kicking off the activity that might need to be remediated anyways.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so what you're seeing here is the entitlement catalog of all of the AD groups. So the Access Hub consumes all of the groups and makes them available for running certification campaigns, establishing policies, and what have you. For the purposes of this, Jeremy's going to specify or select a couple of the groups to include in this campaign. Again, very, very quick and easy. So now you can see these entitlements have been selected. He's going to specify an approver. In this case, for demo purposes, we're going to specify the super user. But again, this could be anybody in the organization who may be the approver for these particular groups. And then Jeremy's going to go and submit the certification campaign. That's it. It's very, very simple. I was in discussions with someone, an expert in a competing technology that said, Jay, what you just showed me there would have taken me a week to set up that certification campaign, writing code, customization, and what have you, that we've done in like 1 minute. So now Jeremy has run the certification campaign, and you see the status of the campaign. So I see there's 3 participants in the certification campaign, and none of them have been certified yet. And down below, you can see each one of those certification tasks and what its current status is. So it's waiting for task completion. So what has happened here is the Access Hub has generated the certification tasks, and they're sitting in the certifier's inbox waiting for certification. So Jeremy's now going to go over into the certification task list, and you can see there's 3 certification tasks waiting for his actions. So he's going to pull up one of these certification tasks, and we can see that the campaign is the IT Access campaign, and the entitlement is IT System Right Access, which in this case happens to be an AD group. And we see that there's 2 members of this group. So now Jeremy's going to go ahead and try and certify this access. And we're based on the policy that we established previously, we can see that Chester is in violation of this policy. Now, because the policy is not a mandatory policy, there is an override button, and we'll show you what happens when Jeremy overrides this. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And he's just going to go back and quickly run the other 2 certification tasks here, just for completion purposes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to show you what the output is of this. So if he goes back into the certification campaign, we can see all 3 participants have now been certified, and we see the status. And now after the fact, after the certification campaign is run, what you can do is you can export the results of that certification campaign. And what will happen here is it'll generate a PDF, and we'll show you, and this essentially becomes your audit trail for this given certification campaign. So the process is essentially, after you run your certification campaign, you export the results, and then you can archive those results. So when the auditors come knocking, you have all of your proof of certification for audit and review. So Jeremy is going to pull up this certification campaign report, and I know what the certification campaign name was, the certification model, when it was started, what the scope of it was, when its target completion date, when the report was generated, and what entitlements as part of this campaign were certified. And if we cursor down here, each one of those certification tasks has its own page, essentially, that identifies who the certifier of this entitlement was, what date they certified it, any policy violations that were in effect, and what colleagues were certified as part of that task. And if we go down, we can see down at the bottom here, we see our IT Systems Right Access task. And in the middle there, you can see the policy violation that Chester Burke was in violation of this policy, but it was overridden by the certifier. Okay? So again, very, very rapid, very, very agile way of doing identity governance. It doesn't need to be a mess, and it doesn't need to take you months and months and months of effort. Okay? So thanks a lot, Jason. You guys can proceed next if you want to move on to the Classy Docs demo. I think you're on mute, Jason.
Good morning, Jay. This is Rick speaking. Thank you for your.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your demo.
You're welcome.
Perhaps in the interest of waiting for Jason to come back online, do you often find that folks that are running a DLP type program will speak to you about identity and perhaps this suite of tools? Jay, are you still there?
Yes. What was the question, Rick?
I was asking if you often have conversations with organizations around their data loss prevention.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, data loss prevention is really, it's a combination of things to really address those issues. Identity governance is part of it, but also data governance is a big piece, right? And we are working with Data 443 right now in integrating the two products such that not only will I be able to see what the person has, so the entitlement, let's say it happens to be an Active Directory group, but also what does that group protect and what are the contents of it? So yeah, DLP is an overriding reason as to why organizations, you know, amongst others, of why organizations are trying to implement identity governance.
Exactly. Hopefully somebody can hear me now.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jason.
Yes,
Wow,
sir.
what a challenge. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. What I'm going to do is very quickly go through the last bit of the slides here and then show a few things to make sure we get to the Q&A. We've got a bunch that come in. On the GDPR side, you can quickly replace the word GDPR with any other acronym you would like to communicate with today. PIPEDA, the California privacy law, the Brazilian one that just went in, they all look and smell the same essentially. And in reality, they're really talking about good security, hygiene, and, you know, some of the basic blocking, tackling you should be doing. You should be doing some discovery. You must be doing cataloging. Absolutely. Monitoring, reporting is a pretty simple thing. But some of the orchestration, security, and audit governance activities are hard to do and certainly require some investment. So on a privacy perspective, you're seeing it is really about the data and the surrounding controls about the data: who, what, when, where, and why. What we also see is a lot of activities around managing the workflow of a privacy request. We spent a lot of time this week on a few other customers working through what a workflow scenario looks like for them. If you look at the activity of a privacy request is pretty in depth. We're talking about looking through data repositories. We're looking about matching data across data sources. We even had one customer who, you know, has been receiving faxes for probably a decade, and they were using a fax server, right? So they were scanning them to PDF and putting them in a share. That stuff is subject to privacy request. Another customer had paper files from 40 years ago that they had not destroyed, for varying reasons, and now they have to scan them in and then classify and govern them. So there's a lot of work that goes into these activities, and part of the assessment could be, if you're subject to some sort of privacy requirement, is understanding your capabilities from an organizational perspective to do some of this stuff, right? Whether it's searching for data, whether it's responding to an end customer request, or managing a remediation activity. So some of the activities surrounding privacy are not all technological in nature, right? They're business process. It involves other organizations probably, and a lot of that's got to be quarterbacked and managed. So we're spending a lot of time on the workflow side as well, as part of the solution. And when we look at that, we're talking about end to end, right from the request perspective all the way through to completion. So some of that assessment work again will include some of those activities. And what I want to show you as well, the last slide here before I show you the back end, is we look at the data perspective as having a classification life cycle. As data has different sensitivity levels and value to the business, there are always different things that apply towards that calculation or that risk, assignment. So we go through an approach of classifying the data, but using your own data to train the machine learning and understand better about what related data looks like. So part of the assessment activities for privacy capability, for example, would be understanding what your data discovery capabilities are, what your data governance capabilities are, what the reporting and access control requirements are, and your capabilities against those. And also, do you really understand not just how your data is classified, but how it changes over time from a classification perspective? Is it sensitive today? Then 2 years later, it's not sensitive. What are you doing with that? Are you expiring the content? Are you doing some data management activities? Very much a part of the lifecycle process for process management and privacy. What we've done is I'll show you a couple things on the back end, again, that would be used in support of the engagement with someone like Online Business Systems. They might say, as part of the assessment, saying, you don't have a really good handle on where your data is and how it's classified. On top of that, you probably don't have a good assessment of who's got access to it. So we're going to use something like ClassiDocs to quickly scan through the data repositories. And again, we support almost 400 different data sets to combine into the queries and start doing classification of the data. And you're seeing here that the system itself is already classifying information differently as it's working through laptops, desktops, servers, and cloud drives. And what's interesting here is, again, as you're changing policy, the confidentiality level or sensitivity level is updating. And then as part of that assessment of, going back to our lovely dashboard here that I like to look at, going back to this kind of an endpoint result, you're able to use some of the information right out of ClassiDocs and N8 to understand specifically who's got access to what, when were they last reviewed their access, and certainly is their access too much, too little, or is it combinatively with other roles or permissions they might have, excessive. The tooling combined really helps to drive an assessment value and give you this data that is very rich and accurate. I think it's really important to say, we did scans on 14 file shares. We found these kind of permissions. We found this kind of information. We found confidential in what you thought was just a public repository, for example. And as we go forward and refine your classifications, we suspect we'll find more. That is good data that goes into directly this deliverable, right?
And Jason,
really
if I could add to that, one of the things that's key, in addition to being thorough, obviously, is speed, right? Online Business Systems does their assessments, but it's equally important to show quick positive results back to the business, right? Rather than months and months and months of effort to start to show quick wins and value back to the business.
Absolutely, and I think, do I have my architecture picture? I'll bring it up in a minute. What's important architecturally for everyone to consider on the call here is that, you're looking at the fact that, both ClassiDocs and the Access Hub can be deployed via the cloud. And that's your cloud, is hybrid clouds, AWS is Azure, your own VM, however you want to deploy it from a it's available nearly instantaneously, and you're able to start collecting data. From our perspective, it's just running an agent on one workstation. We can start collecting file information, access permission, all that information, which rolls into N8 and its calculations, and then N8 is going to be able to consider and pull in, Active Directory, your Salesforce, and Okta and a couple other guys, and bring them in and start doing these assessments. Again,
right.
These assessments.
And the key there is, Jason, that it allows you to do it incrementally. So you don't have to boil the ocean and do the full enterprise right out of the gate. You can start with, let's say, Active Directory, and then you can increase, your scope over time, right? Delivering results incrementally.
Yeah, I would echo that as well, guys. I mean, So Jason, just to validate your assertion there, anything around asset management is just it's a huge problem, and it's very common for organizations, whether they be small or large, to have issues with their assets and understanding their informational assets, understanding the relationships and support of their critical business services. So absolutely, guys.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I love seeing, you know, the heat map changing over time as the data rolls in, right? It could be increasing on the risk side or decreasing, but at the end of the day, it's becoming further refined as, you know, some of these tools are used to bring in that information. And what's really important there too, I think, from that perspective is, from a Classy Docs perspective, wrong demo environment, we're able to scan, you know, not just files, but all databases, all cloud drives, all applications. And, you know, that information is fed into the Access Hub, and again, goes into that risk framework as well to understand, for example, you know, you probably do have PII information in Salesforce. You need to identify specifically where it is. You need to know exactly who's got access to it, and, you know, really what the attribute level or field level or table level is in Salesforce, because if you have a breach, or if you have an incident response, or you have to respond to a privacy request, you're going to have to go find that specifically. And then, you know, with that high level classification that we always talk about, where we're classifying information sets across repositories, is really important to do and then continuously run. Okay. And the idea is you're able to do this very iteratively. It takes a few seconds to add a new classification. It only takes a few mouse clicks to add more rules and everything else. You know, one thing that we've done now is invested heavily on the patterns themselves. And what you'll be seeing in the next few weeks is an updated release, which will include 200 plus what we consider to be GDPR related queries. So you're able to just import one bucket and have Classy Docs scan all the repositories, databases, and files, and say this file or this database table has potentially GDPR information in it, and we can identify that.
Yeah.
They're the big part here.
And, if I could add, for the folks that are on the phone that are really interested in GDPR, some of the articles that are supported through these technologies are Articles 5, 25, 30, 32, 33, 34, and 35, amongst others.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is there's 99 articles, right? So the GDPR is a big one, and not all of it is, of course, you know, technological controls or anything else. And again, I think what the assessment does is it helps to drive out some of that, and it's going to cover the areas that you might not, you know, maybe care too much about. You know, privacy policy on the website, for example, is a requirement, but certainly from an overall compliance perspective, you need to be concerned about that stuff. So that's a good wrap up there too. I think always able to show more with the products. I think we're happy to demonstrate them all to you. The other thing I want to call out for everybody as well is we have, you know, the platform is running in a virtual machine you're able to execute through a browser. So just sign up with us and we'll send you a link, and you're able to run Classy Docs to your heart's content and actually use it with Word and Excel and these sort of things and exercise the product. What's really interesting is, you know, we're finding a lot of traction with the concept of a global search and discovery capability. And probably the bigger part that we're also seeing is now we're able to also alert when data reappears, which is a big problem, especially in a privacy context where, you know, you might have done that right to deletion, for example, for a user and finished that February 15th, for example. But someone who's been on sick leave for 6 months and laptop's been off comes in and plugs in, you've now reintroduced their data into the infrastructure, and you need to have controls and then remediation against that. So there's a lot of things in there that are interesting, and, you know, online has a lot of these tips and tricks, I guess, basically, right? Learnings from the field that have been done over time. The good thing is GDPR has been in action now for a few months. We're starting to get really stable with it, and we're definitely getting a lot of good information. All right, so let's wrap up with the Q&A just to make sure that we've got some of this in a good standing right now. Rick, you know, I think we covered this quickly, but how does a typical security assessment take from a high level? If you could talk to it, I'll bring up your slide.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it really depends on kind of the nature of the organization, whether they be small or large, et cetera. Just for the sake of discussion, for a small to medium-sized organization, it probably would be in between 4 to 8 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
As you can see from the slide. Sorry, go ahead.
During that time, you're producing artifacts that are reusable, right? So
absolutely,
there is stuff that's coming out immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. It's effectively a 5-step process, as you can see on the screen, but it's an iterative process. So I mean, you know what, get through, identify the key critical areas that need to be addressed, look for the quick wins, and move forward. It's intended to make progress over, you know, a duration of time, not to wait 6, 12, 9, or 18 months and then try to address it.
Exactly. And, you know, some of these might be critical findings that immediately need to be enacted, right? Like you might even find some sort of breach or some sort of activity that might be happening as well already. Yeah, I like the way that it's iterative and quick, right? So, and to that point, you know, Jay, you know, I think this relates to the conversation we had with that larger.com earlier this week about, you know, how do I get a recertification campaign done without involving everybody in IT and all the AD guys and, you know, talking to the SAP folks and doing this integration, APIs and ports and all of that, you know, complex hard work that just takes a heck of a lot of time. You know, what is the best way to get a quick research done, you know, kind of from an offline perspective?
So I can answer that, Jason. So the Access Hub is actually broken up into a series of modules. And depending on the customer need, they can choose to implement all of them or one or multiples. For certification and governance, that's all part of what we call our remediate module. And the interesting thing about it is that customers can choose just to do certification campaigns without all of the provisioning, without involving IT or any other groups. And it's really, really as simple as doing some extracts from your various systems that you want to include as part of your certification campaign, uploading them into the Access Hub, and then setting any policies if you want or have needs for, and then running your certification campaign. And when you initiate the certification campaign, it's going to trigger a series of emails to the certifiers to invite them into the Access Hub to perform their certification tasks. So end to end, that process of getting started from a recertification process, you can really be up and running in hours. You know, if you have the data already, you saw how easy it is through the demo. You could be literally up and initiating your certification campaign in minutes.
You know, I think the best part of your walkthrough that you know excites me the most is when you literally drag a CSV file onto it and it consumes it and starts running. Pretty magical because, again, like you said, you don't have to do all this enterprise stitching together stuff to get some data out. And back to the assessment and back to the urgency of privacy and back to these new legislations that, frankly, everyone will be affected with in the future. You really need to get a hand on this quickly. And I think, you know, this combined offering, again, that we're talking about is a really good start on that. It's, you know, it's cost effective, it drives a lot of value quickly, and there's a lot of data that's consumed. Yeah.
And on that note, Jason, a lot of times what we find is IT is being audited, and you know, that audit process is pretty intensive, right? They can use the Access Hub to get ready for the audit very, very rapidly, and that's absolutely critical because most organizations are not in a position of audit readiness, and it's a big mad scramble to get our stuff together so that the auditors have the information they need to perform their audit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think there's a resounding theme here, right? Quick, easy, fast, simple, you know, to the point of just dragging and dropping exports into the Access Hub. Same idea with Classy Docs, where you're able just to very quickly, we stage the back end for you. We do literally a 15 to 20-minute configuration session with you online remotely. And then you just start launching the agents. And those guys can talk to everything on the enterprise side. So literally, if you have a workstation or a virtual machine that can install a MSI, it can immediately start classifying, you know, all of your files and feeding Classy Docs all of that information that, you know, is required as part of the assessment, but even some of your security controls review as well, right? This is something that is, again, very quick and easy to do, and you know, adds a lot of value as well. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. Great session, everyone. Thank you very much. I really want to you know, extend my appreciation to Rick and Jay for spending the time on the call and prepping for this. We expect this to be a recurring theme going out throughout the year. In addition, we'll be doing perhaps some deeper dives on some of this subject matter, which of course we would you know, extend the offer to share this to your team. Some of it will also include some of the softer parts. Just like a few weeks ago, we did a webinar with a legal counsel who's very specialized in GDPR. And she's been exercising it in the European Union for the past year and a half. And now she's just swamped with North American and South American business now. So I think we're going to continue this privacy story, and we'll be including some of the other stuff like the Airlock product that we've just wrapping up the acquisition on. That is a great piece of tech that is going to assist in a lot of your requirements as well. All right, thanks everyone. The recording will go out shortly as well. Feel free to share it. And as you can see with the chat and or the email link that's coming out, feel free to reach out at all for any sort of demo or walkthrough of the tech. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jay. Thanks everyone for attending.
Bye-bye.